Hello and welcome everyone. We're going to get started with our keynote session with Jasveen Brar in just 1 minute, and that will be followed by an amazing collective visioning session that will flow into as the final session of the day. But before we get too far into things, I just wanted to do another friendly how to engage in the session reminder with your Zoom tools. So you have been muted so that we can make respectful listening space for the keynote today, but we do still want to hear from you. So please use the chat to send your thoughts, your ponderings, what this time sparks for you, and also any questions that you have. And there's also closed captions that are available for this in case you need them. You can just click that show captions and then enable subtitles option, and it will automatically create a transcript for you at the bottom. And last but not least, if you're having any trouble today, please feel free to reach out to us over email at info@wellingtonwaterwatchers.ca, and we'll be there to help you. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to the moderator for this session, Arlene.
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, and thanks and welcome to this Watershed keynote session featuring Jasveen Brar. We are so grateful to have this space with her today to learn from her experience and leadership and passions. And I wanted to share that Danny, Megan, and I recently this past year took a 6-month course run by the Capacity Building Institute. And that's where we got to meet Jasveen. Jasveen was in a group, a fellow ED circle along with me. So I got to meet her there, and I was really excited to find a time when we could bring Jasveen to come and speak to our audience. It's really inspiring, all your work at the Youth Climate Lab. And so I'm just gonna launch into this little, let me find where it is, a bio that I have for you. So welcome, Jasveen. Jasveen uses she, her pronouns. She's a climate educator from the prairies. Her work centers around environmental justice, intersectional environmentalism, ensuring that youth are involved in decision-making. She holds a BSc from Dalhousie University in biology and sustainability, and has experience working in ocean conservation, polar policy, and education. She is the executive director of Youth Climate Lab, a Canada-based global nonprofit organization of youth, mobilizing youth to create just climate resilient futures. Jasveen has been named a top 30 environmental educator by NAAEE, top 25 environmentalists by Starfish, and holds a Sovereign's Medal for volunteers from the Governor General of Canada. She also serves on the governance board of the Canadian Ocean Literacy Council, and all of this in her young years. Thanks so much for being with us here today, Jasveen. I'm going to pass it right on over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Arlene, and to Danny and all the folks at Water Watchers that have created this space for me today and for inviting me. It's such an honor to be one of the keynotes and one of the final folks to really close off this day. And I also wanted to thank all of you in the audience for listening and engaging and really, making space for water. As Arlene just said, my name is Jasveen. You're all welcome to call me Jazz. I'm the executive director at Youth Climate Lab. And just this past month, I celebrated my 1 year at the organization as well. So it's been quite an incredible journey so far. And at Youth Climate Lab, our vision is really to support young people, no matter where they're coming from, who they are, to catalyze transformative climate action in their communities to the highest levels of decision making. So we often work within so-called Canada, but we've had, the privilege of working in more than 77 countries in our now 6 years of existence as well. And it's, it's a real honor. But today I'm actually, switching it up in a way to the normal presentations that I do, and really sharing more about myself and my journey, which I haven't really had the opportunity to do so in a really long time. So I'm really excited, and I hope that my journey resonates with folks and, allows to create space for some reflection. Prior to Youth Climate Lab, I also wanted to mention I've held other positions at the Inuit Circumpolar Council as well at Oceanwise, where collectively, we worked on ocean literacy and conservation efforts, mainly based in Canada, and really seeing how they intersect with youth action. So, making these spaces more accessible, providing mentorship and providing guidance so that young folks can have transformative action in their communities and they can see the results and, really build that community and capacity, which I think is really, really important when we, think about a just and climate resilient future of how are we actually connecting with our community members and how are we actually providing more than just a seat at the table. But yes, as I mentioned, I do want to talk a little bit more about myself. So I may be a little nervous because again, I haven't done it a little bit, but in the lead up to this, what I've been thinking about is just how the different bodies of water have shaped me in my life. And I've been thinking about the role that water, freshwater, saltwater, oceans, and rivers really play. I think we know that water is life. I forget the actual statistics, so forgive me, but I believe it's 2/3 of the air that we breathe actually comes from the ocean versus trees. And I think that's really incredible. And I think, a shift that we're seeing in the ocean realm is also the efforts to reforest the ocean. So focusing on seaweed, which I think is really cool. But yes, more about myself. My parents were both born and raised in Punjab in India. And for those that are unfamiliar with the region, the name itself means the land of five waters, which refers to the 5 rivers that run through the province of Punjab. So Punj means 5, and then Jab means rivers. And I really think that is so meaningful because it not only, celebrates and brings attention to the role that rivers and watersheds and these systems play geographically, but also what they mean to a community and how significant water is to people and culture. Water break. And so in my life so far, my ancestry and my parents, I think, play the most significant role. But I've also been reflecting on, water and rivers that have been in other facets of my life. I was born on the Pacific Coast. I grew up in a small town of Medicine Hat, Alberta, with the South Saskatchewan River flowing through it. And much of my education was spent near the Atlantic Ocean in Halifax. And really the most life-changing and significant moment of my life, and the reason that I work in the field that I do and I hold the position that I do now happened actually at the Antarctic Ocean. And so the photo that we saw right at the beginning, that was taken, I believe, almost 9 years ago now, which is crazy because I was in my second year of university. I was just about to turn 20. I was studying microbiology and specifically these parasites that were found in water and wastewater. And I had this opportunity to go on this expedition to Antarctica. And I was like, amazing, I'll be able to get a really cool trip, but also study the microorganisms in one of the most isolated places on Earth. And I thought that was fascinating. I love science and I was a woman in STEM. And I remember by day 2, I just felt so different, that my eyes were opened to a life and to a world that I didn't have a lot of connection to. unfortunately, growing up in Medicine Hat, I actually did not have access to a lot of environmental literacy. I would say the extent of what I was taught was the basic science, but never that relationship between how we impact the planet and how it impacts us. And so being able to go on this expedition, and I really can't emphasize how much it changed me. Like I really think of my life before Antarctica and after. And so the reason why it was so transformative, other than, the experience itself, was that towards the end of the expedition, we did this hike on this place called Deception Island, which actually I believe is where that photo was taken, in the one that we just saw. And we're going around, we're looking at these chin strap penguins, some newborns, and it's fascinating because we're like, we're just so far away from anything. And it was one of my first experiences of experiencing wildlife like that. And then, right there, smack dab in the middle of these two penguin nests, we came across a fully intact, like 2-liter plastic water bottle. And to this day, and it's almost been a decade, I really kind of struggle to explain what that actually meant to me in the sense of, or, what I felt. I think I felt awful, in the sense that how is something of our man-made creation and our design polluting one of the most isolated places, in the world, where there are no human inhabitants, and really trying to wrap my mind around that, of how we truly are so disrespectful to this planet, and we continue to be. And so I took those feelings, and we were leaving the next day, and I was going, back to second year, because this is over Christmas break, and just going back to classes. And I just really couldn't shake that feeling in my first week. And I then found myself in the sustainability building at Dalhousie, where I was studying. And I ended up walking into the local college that was there, or the department. And I left that office having changed my degree. And so it really was a life-changing moment. And I did that for many reasons. And it really kind of came down to education as well. And, I think I just recognized that there were just so many things that I didn't know. And I just had so many questions. And I really just wanted to see, like, what is there when we think about the environment, when we think about sustainability? It's more than just recycling or reducing our impact, but, what is it actually? And so I'm really grateful that I had decided to follow my gut. And, over the years and up until I graduated, I got to learn so much about like history and negotiations and policy and environmental racism, and just how dynamic the world is. And I'm so grateful for the friends that I met, along the way, and the professors that became mentors, because they really shaped me into who I am today. And so, yeah, and, all of that was with the oceans in the background. And so, yeah, I'm just really, really grateful for that. And that then, led to more, and working in the nonprofit space, and spending a few years like really diving into oceans work and water work and community, and how do we provide better accessibility, and truthfully, how do we get young folks, especially those that look like me, into these spaces. And I really think that that's one of my main missions that I try and work towards. And I know that I'm not unique to these types of experiences, and And I think it's awesome over this past decade that we've seen a shift in more programming and more accessibility, so that we're able to get youth at those early stages and, just show them that not only do you belong in these spaces, but you can have a job, or that, there's intersectionality here. And so that's really what I try and work on in my new role as executive director. And I think overall, I'm not unique to this experience in the sense that I also imagine that you folks in the audience and as organizers have had a day of connection and reflection. And so I also encourage you all to, step away from the sessions today, to journal and to go out and connect with water in the ways in which that you do, or in the ways in which that you celebrate water and this earth. And, for myself, it's these experiences and the people that I've met along the way that have also, shaped me and have become my mentors and my collaborators and partners. And overall, I think what's at its core and what also keeps me driven is community. The impacts of climate change are unique and diverse for each person, even within, a city or a neighborhood. And I really believe that each person, therefore, our actions must be as diverse as well. And so I think whether or not you work in this field, we're all inhabitants of this earth at the end of the day, and therefore we all have a role to play. And yeah, I think that's the bulk of what I really wanted to, super vulnerably share with you folks today. And what I really want to use the rest of this time is to have a conversation and to learn more about your experiences as well. And, see where maybe I'm biased, run an organization called Youth Climate Lab, but also the role that youth play in your jobs or in your spaces. Because really, youth, I believe, are at the core of a lot of work. And the change that I would really like to see is, what's beyond a seat at the table? How do we genuinely work with young people, make sure that they're involved in decision making, and that they also hold positions of power? Because I think the journey to a just and climate resilient future is a collective journey, and it's with the whole community. But yeah, I'll pause there.
Amazing. Thanks, Jasveen. Yeah, there's a number of things that got percolated in my mind, and I'll start with some of my questions, but just want to invite folks to please also feel free to pop comments or questions in the chat that we can share. But interesting, you were referencing the story of finding, the bottle their way in the vast middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And I heard this interesting critique recently about the concept of the Anthropocene, right? So maybe many of us can think about the impact that humans are having, but the critique around that language was that, it isn't, of course, all humans, and it isn't exactly fair to say the Anthropocene, totally. Because, a more indigenous worldview is not those humans are in existence and not creating those problems. So there's something specifically about modernity, or mm-hmm. modern kind of people. So it just made me think a little bit too about, we often say that this work is intersectional, and I'm wondering if you'd share a bit more, from your point of view. You've shared a bit about how bringing youth voices in and having youth have some power at that table is important, but there's also many other intersections. Just wondered mm-hmm. if you would share a bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, what first comes to mind, and I'm sure this is well known, but I always love to, provide the framework. And we know that, I don't really quite know how to phrase it, but the world is unjust. The folks that have had the least to do with what we're seeing today are the folks that are impacted the most. I think about just the recent floods that happened in Pakistan and in the region of Punjab there as well. And, for folks that are, some folks that are unaware, Punjab was a province that was split in two. So there's a Punjab in Pakistan and one in India as well. But many folks consider us, to be whole. And I see those devastations, and I see just how, again, folks that really are not in positions of power are met with these consequences. And those that are in these positions of power that are really driving what we're kind of seeing today are able to take a back seat and just observe. And so it's quite unjust, and it's quite selfish, I want to say. And I feel, even in this work, I often deal with a lot of guilt, in the sense that, my brothers and I were the first generation that were born here, in like my family line, but seeing how my family had to leave our motherland for a better life so that we could be set up for success, but those successes were not available in, a land that I feel a lot of disconnect with now. And apologies if I get emotional. But yeah, I know that this is, the reality of many, many folks. And I know what we're looking for, or I know, the next kind of decades that we're looking towards right now is that, worldwide migration, in a sense. I just at this previous COP in Egypt that I had the honor of going to, there are many nations around the world that are no longer talking about how are we going to fight climate change. They're like, no, it's far too late. It's about how are we going to adapt? How are we going to mitigate? And how do we save ourselves? And yeah, I think that many folks don't quite see the extent of how our actions are related to those consequences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Jasveen, also for just sharing at such a personal level, because I think like sharing our vulnerability in this work is so key to how we all have to be responding to this too. So yeah. I see a question here, and it actually just bumped my question out of my mind. So I'm going to go to this question, and maybe mine will come back. But this is a really good one Anne Washington has put in here. It says, in your work with youth, do you hear their negative feelings about the sustainability of the planet, and how do you respond?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's many critiques of the systems that we have in place now, the accessibility of like youth entering these spaces, because it is quite difficult. And it is quite, sometimes the spaces that are available are very tokenistic. And so, one of the things that we work with, and, with all the youth that we interact with is, we're trying to create spaces of collaboration and co-design. And we want to make sure that the partnerships that we enter into are genuine and rooted in, a collective cause. And so youth absolutely, face that balance of, well, how do we get access? Sometimes there are programs, but even the programs themselves have a lot of barriers. And oftentimes it's not for all youth, but it's only for certain youth. A lot of programming nowadays is all based on volunteering. And, so I reflect on the programs that I was able to do as a young participant. And it was because I was in a position where I could volunteer my time, but many youth don't. And many Black and Brown youth do not. They need paying opportunities. They need better accessibility. They need internet, and the list is so long, but it's more than just creating the opportunity, but it's about like, how are we breaking it down and actually making it so that the opportunity in itself supports, said youth or young person. And I think what a lot of other youth are also facing, in tandem with that and, and their critiques is just facing a lot of anxiety and grief. I, again, super transparent, but probably the thing that I talk about most sometimes to my therapist is about the state of the world. And I know that that is a product of my position as well, and the work that we do, but it's quite daunting and it's quite, stressful to think about what is coming forth. And so I think a lot of young folks, there is that shift of how do we actually navigate eco-anxiety? And I know it's not just youth. I'm sure that many folks, even in the audience today feel that way too. And so, how do we make space? How do we make space for joy? How do we make space for connection and community? And I think that is a solution in itself to feeling that loneliness in this grief and anxiety stricken space.
Yeah, definitely. Grief, we work with it. We can transform it to action and to movement that can help be the compost of, the state of grief. So yeah, I'm reflecting right now on the fact that, our historically and kind of currently our Water Watcher audience typically, there are of course exceptions around, but we're typically more of folks from my generation or older. So, on average, middle to upper class white folks in have been our audience. And yeah, the things that you're touching on are reflections that I think we often have within our staff team. It's like, how do we leverage the privilege that, some folks call it unearned advantage that life has afforded us because of our positionality, into shifting the narratives and the voices of who's present, and how do we have more voices present who come from different lived experiences and worldviews. Because this is somebody, Linda's put here in the chat, which is really important. Imagine a different world where everyone gets paid a living wage, as opposed to being asked to do it as volunteers, say, as you said, like people
Absolutely.
need to put food on their table. I don't have a question in there, but just wonder if that inspires any thoughts.
No, I think I can't name names, but it goes directly back to one of the positions I held where, we were designing youth programming, and, when funders have very strict, not guidelines, but like, these are the goals that we would like you to meet, like X percentage of youth that come from, these individuals of like Black, Brown, Indigenous, etc. Or from rural spaces. And, our feedback is cool. So we know how to reach these youth. Here's the list of, accessibility things that we would need. And they're like, no, actually, we can't do that, but we still want you to meet those goals. And so I think that's where I find that a lot of, federal bodies and large frameworks are so accessible or unaccessible. I mean, let's take the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, designed by the UN. I see their applicability, but also, my neighbors don't. And I think that that's something that I do have a critique of frameworks and of like campaigns and mandates that are set out, where these national or sometimes international pieces, they're not localized. And so I think that's a big missing piece. And, in my work, and always a lot of reflection that I do is that because I grew up in Medicine Hat, a lot of my work is with the thought of, would my neighbors who work in the oil sector, or my farmer, or, the farmers next door, would they understand this? Like, is this applicable to them? And no, often it isn't. And, and then I think about youth in this space too. And it's just, we've created these spaces that are inaccessible, or the language that we use, people feel so removed from it. And so it's, I just feel like we really got to strip things down and really just localize our efforts and make sure that, everyone feels heard and everyone is involved, because I do know that all of us together, we do just want livable futures. So we're not really against each other. There's community and collaboration there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, like place-based, informed by the place, that's where the solutions.
Yes.
There's a question here from Jay. I'm interested to hear how you'll answer it. So Jay says, do we ever look at how our numbers, 8 billion and counting, impact the planet, its future, and how much more the earth will be plundered to provide? What are your thoughts on that?
Truthfully, if I could just be honest, I'm not quite sure. And I also wonder if there's anyone in the audience as well that does have opinions around population. But I think I really believe that, yes, our numbers, we have, it was recently in this past year that I think we hit 8 million, but I don't believe that we have like an overpopulation problem. I think it's more around like resources and how we use them. Like, I can really only comment on Canada and like North America, but we're very wasteful. I really believe that, our earth is able to provide for us, but again, it's not accessible to everyone. And so if this wealth and these resources were shared in the ways that they should be, not that like food, water, access to clean air should be something that we need to discuss. I think that's like a human right that we should all have access to. And then we cut waste. I think absolutely we're able to provide. So I don't think that it's a population issue, if I can say that.
Yeah, thank you, Jasveen. That's really great. That one comes up a lot too, and I'm happy to. It's interesting to hear your reflections. Oh, here's somebody, Shannon, add in here. The old adage that the world can support billions, not billionaires, seems to ring true in this regard, because it's really about wealth distribution, resource distribution. So, here's another question here. I wonder what you think are the forces we need to feed or build that are going to move us toward the more just future we want to build. What are the calls to action you would call us towards? And this is a question from Danny.
Yeah, I think, my opinions really come from more as, a youth working in a youth space. And so maybe I'll start there. I think reflecting on our systems currently and, are they truly accessible? Is it truly a reflection of our communities and of the people that we're hoping to provide for? Or is it, maybe I'm answering my own question or the prompt I'm putting out, but like, yeah, it's just generational wealth and people with many, many privileges that are making decisions for folks that frankly do not get consent. And, that dives into, let's just take Canada, for example, but our Indigenous communities from, coast to coast to coast, and the relationships that we hold with them, they're not fair and they're not rooted in the right places. So I think imagining what does a shift in power look like for our future? What does, like true reconciliation work actually look like? And I think that there's power in that, in that shift to change. So I truthfully don't know the specifics of, what are the steps and what is it to strip it down. But I think what I do know is that it's a collective action. And what I also envision is, more young people feeling empowered to take up space, to work in, finance and in policy and drive that action, and to see much more diversity at, the highest levels of power, throughout. And I think that that's really what I hope and dream of in the future.
Amazing. Thank you. Here's a question from Anne, which is interesting to pose to someone who works with youth all the time. So would you acknowledge the fears of a teenager about the planet, or move on with what to do about it?
Yeah, sorry, I wish I had these questions kind of in front of me too. I get a little lost in the chat. Was the question?
Yeah, so let me say it here again. I guess this is about, you know, if you have teens in your life that are feeling the burden of the climate impact, would you acknowledge their fears about the planet, or just move into like what to do about it? How would you go about that, or how do you go about it in your youth work?
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, in the ways in which I work, and maybe that's, you know, myself too, I think absolutely at the beginning of like any journey or any solutions-based work is it's important to, you know, pause and actually make space. And so, you know, when I work with teenagers, or once upon a time when I was a teenager myself, and also, yeah, through our work, and, you know, I'm the eldest of many siblings and cousins in my life. And I think it's really important to acknowledge and sit with something. You know, I think like a lot of what I'm motivated by is those moments when I really sit in discomfort, or, you know, having to face it. And I think like when you're working with teenagers, acknowledge it. It's like, yeah, absolutely, this is what we're facing. And because I think that that is like a hook, you know, and an anchor. And if that is something that youth can go back to, that's a driving force. And then wanting to channel that into action and into positivity. Next month, YCL, we're going to be working with Inside Education here in Alberta. And it feels very full circle, because when I was a teenager in high school, I was a participant in one of their programs. So, you know, all these youth come together, we talk about energy, we talk about oil for sure, classic Alberta. But I've seen the shift in like, we acknowledge what's happening, but also let's imagine what a different future can look like for us. And I think that's really awesome. And, you know, long since I've been a teenager, but I go through that too, even now as an elder youth, or whatever 28 is.
Yeah, and you know, the other side of that too, I'm just thinking about, Jasveen, is that it's really also important for us in older generations to hear the fears, like to really hear and sit with them ourselves. So, you know, I had this opportunity one time where a young person, I was noting, and this is a few years back now, I was noting my 50th birthday, and this young person said to me, wow, I don't even know that I will ever have an opportunity to turn 50. And it just was incredibly impactful for me to hear that, you know. So for those of us that are in, you know, in this environmental movement of an older generation who, you know, arguably are the ones who have really significantly contributed to the scenarios that we're now trying to correct from, it's important for us to hear that and sit with that grief as well, to help support the youth in this work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm just watching a little bit the clock, so I know that there's a lot of good chat happening here, and I'm just going to see right now, maybe we can take a couple more questions. And actually, there's a few comments that I think are well worth sharing here. So Shannon says, I've been reading a new book called Nourishing Resistance, which is essays compiled by Ren Ari. I don't know how to pronounce that, sorry. And it has some great examples of how folks are creating new paradigms. It's been a really inspiring read that is helping me imagine how things could be.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, I don't know about that resource. There was one other one that I wanted to pick up on here. Well, yeah, this is a comment from Danny back to the, you know, there was a lot generated around the conversation about, you know, the carrying capacity of the earth. And Danny says, we often talk about the racism of the overpopulation narrative. It is the 1% creating the vast majority of the climate burden that we have. Gosh, I'm trying to keep up with these here. Let me see. Oh, yeah. Paula shares, there's any place for the lived experience of wise elders, you know, which maybe in wise elders and in the modern experience might be harder to come across in terms of folks that aren't rooted and connected into long histories and lineages. So yes, the gap of that kind of eldership in modernity. All right, I'm seeing lots of comments and
Amazing.
no further questions. So I'm going to.
I don't know, maybe Arlene, I'll ask you a question because I know we have some time, not to hop it in, but I guess, like we're here at the end of, this virtual event today. I'd love to know, like, what are you feeling? And then maybe specific to that, what do you envision, for your future as someone who, has more lived experience, working in this space, and what's the role of like youth that you see, or you envision?
Oh, that's a really great question, Jasveen. And one of the things that I think that it has been my experience in this work is the more that we do around our efforts towards decolonizing, and the more that we do around our efforts towards recognizing how important it is to bring intersectionality into the work that we do, the more appealing we are to a youthful audience. I think very much like people want to put their time and energy behind things that they feel are deeply meaningful. And at this juncture that we find ourselves in, it comes in those intersectional, in the ways that we're bringing those pieces all together and connecting the dots across issues that maybe others, even in my past, I never connected. And so the more we do that, the more appealing we are to a broader range, but particularly to youth. And I'm inspired continually by what I see youth doing around the globe on this topic, yourself included. That there's so much movement and momentum, and we have to. Those of us, I'm speaking like we from an older generation, settler kind of group of folks. It's incumbent on us for us to do our homework and get familiar with what it means to leverage our privilege and through an intersectional lens. So yeah, that's how I would answer that, I think.
I love it. Thank you, Arlene.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think I'm getting cues from folks that it might be time to move on. So Jasveen, I want to take a moment here just to really thank you for joining us today and sharing from your perspective. I have a lot of questions, and maybe one time we can connect personally. You were at COP this year, and you've been in a lot of those spaces and connected with an awful lot of folks that are really doing this work on the day-to-day. And I think it's really inspiring and interesting. And we'd love to share some more of those stories too. So thank you for being with us here. And yeah, I think I can see that Danny has shared some of your pieces to follow here in the link. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. This was awesome. And thank you for everyone in the audience for listening. That really means a lot.